Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're glad to have you back with us. I hope that you were able to get out last night and visit some of Washington's restaurants. They need your business, and enjoy some of this lovely weather, and hopefully it'll hold for you and the rain holds off today. We have a really excellent program, and our next keynote speaker, the Honorable David Pekoske, is already with us. So we'd like to move along with our program and get started right away. Administrator David Pekoske was confirmed by the U.S. Senate as Transportation Security Administration's 7th Administrator in August 2017. He leads a workforce of approximately 60,000 employees, including the Federal Air Marshal Service, and is responsible for security operations at nearly 450 airports throughout the United States. Under his leadership, TSA is continuously working to raise the security baseline for both aviation and surface transportation through close partnerships and alliances in a robust homeland security network. Today, Administrator Pekoske will share some of TSA's security initiatives and priorities for the agency. Before joining the TSA, Pekoske was an executive in the government services industry. Most notably, Pekoske served as a 26th Vice Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard, culminating a Coast Guard career that included extensive operational and command experience. On a personal note, the administrator and RAA have a monthly call, and it's some of the most productive conversations that we've had with our government stakeholder partners, really, that I can recall. Very accessible, very responsive, and when we came to the agencies with concerns about unruly passengers, the administrator was extremely responsive and helpful. That dialogue has been critical, and I think it's helped us to surface information and really further security and safety in our system. So with that said, please join me in welcoming Administrator Pekoske.
Well, good morning, everyone. And Faye, thank you very much for that kind introduction. And really, it's been a true pleasure and very productive for us to have the opportunity to really engage regularly with the RAA leadership. And really, you know, Faye and her team know that if there's ever an issue that comes up, it doesn't need to be on the monthly call. I mean, if it's something that's important, I want to be accessible. I want my senior leadership team to be accessible, to be able to understand the concerns and address them. I'd also like to recognize your chair, Dan Flannery. It's very nice to meet you this morning, and I appreciate your leadership of the RAA. And you know, regional airlines, as you well know, critically important to the United States. 41% of scheduled passenger flights, the only source of air service for about 2/3 of the nation's airports, and you know, 2/3 of 440 is a lot. And you are the reason why many small communities have regular, safe, and convenient access to air travel. From my perspective, and the reason why our relationship, I think, is so strong amongst many reasons, is because our goals are aligned. You know, our goal is to ensure safe and secure transportation. And as Faye mentioned, you know, we have responsibility for security in the entire transportation sector, which includes all the surface transportation modes in addition to aviation. So our goals are aligned, safe and secure travel. And what I hope to do this morning, because I want to make sure that I'm responsive to your interests and your concerns, and these engagements allow me to get some additional feedback as to what's on your mind that we may not be addressing as well as you would like us to. And so what I'd like to do is just do some brief remarks and then open it up to Q&A. And I would encourage you, if you have a question, there's not going to be a question that hurts my feelings at all. I've been in this job for 4+ years. I want to make sure that I understand what's on your mind and how you're perceiving what we're doing. And I think it's just good that, you know, once the 30 minutes is up, that, you know, I leave here knowing that you were able to tee up the issues that were most important to you. But as I begin, let me just kind of hark back to 9/11, because that was the reason TSA exists in the first place. We just had our 20th remembrance of 9/11, and every year at TSA headquarters, we have a ceremony to remember 9/11. And the theme of this year's remembrance was Together in Memory, United in Mission. And I think that's really important, particularly at this point in time in the United States, to think very much about. As you all know, we lost 2,977 people on 9/11. And I remember that tragedy. I remember it like it was yesterday, as I'm sure many of you do. But one of the other things that I remember, what it was like to see our country come together in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 and unite together behind a shared experience. And we've worked tirelessly as an agency and as a department to ensure unity of effort and unity of purpose, and then to make sure that that endures now 20 years later. Concern is that we lose that cohesion that was so important to bring everybody together right after 9/11 to make sure that this never happened again. TSA was established on the 19th of November, 2001. So when you think about government process, to establish an agency a little over 2 months after a major terrorist attack is pretty remarkable. And what ends up happening when laws are passed immediately after a significant national event is the Congress provides significant authorities to the government to be able to make sure that we take care of the future for the country. And so we have a significant amount of authority within TSA. We exercise it when we need to exercise it. But I think we do, and this would be where your feedback is helpful. I think we do a good job of making sure that we communicate well with our industry partners, because no matter what we do, we can't do it alone. And it needs to be done together and needs to be done collaboratively. And I hope that when my term as the administrator ends in a little less than a year, that one of the things that I've left with the agency is that increased cooperation, coordination, collaboration with our key industry partners. Back in 2001 and going into 2002, the agency was really built from the ground up. And the first airport that was federalized was Baltimore Washington Airport, and that was federalized on April 30th, 2002. So you got to figure, hey, a law's passed in November 2001. By 2002, people are hired, ready to federalize the first airport, and the federalization ended with Guam Airport being federalized on December 31st of 2003. So in 20 months, 60,000 people, 400 plus airports now have federal security being provided there. As I look into the future, I think there are going to be 3 keys to our success. And like I said, unity of effort, unity of purpose needs to endure, and we need to keep working at that. And so the 3 things that I think we need to focus on are agility, partnerships, and people. And I would submit that, and you may or may not agree with this one, but I worked in government for a long time. TSA is a very agile agency. We are able to change procedures very quickly, and we are able to bring on technology very quickly, sometimes not even using our own processes, but using yours. And I'll talk about that in a second. But when I think about the threat, and this is something that, my job, I need to think about all the time, is what is the threat? How is the threat developing? And how are we mitigating the risk that threat represents? And just to think about the threat, for example, I think the threat now is much more complex than what it ever has been in the 20 years of TSA history. The threat is both foreign-based and foreign-inspired. And so you might hear people think about and talk about, hey, well, the foreign threat has diminished a bit. I don't subscribe to that view. It takes one person or 2 people to execute a plot. And I think the foreign-based and foreign-inspired threat is still there. What's new, and if you watch the testimony of Director Ray and Secretary Mayorkas last week, in fact, about, hey, how is the threat evolving in the homeland, both of them submitted that the domestic terrorism threat is a threat that is increasingly important, in fact, more important now than the foreign-based threat. And then you have to consider both those 2 threat vectors and think about, hey, our threats are not just physical any longer. Our threats are also cyber-based. And sometimes it's combined. So you think of those 4 factors. So foreign-based, foreign-inspired, domestic, and the physical cyber interface. And then you overlay all that with the pandemic that's been going on now for well over a year, with the divisions that exist within our country. It seems like it's very hard sometimes to agree on almost anything. And with the misinformation that is out in the public domain, information operations conducted by foreign nation states to influence American opinion. And then the noise, I would submit, that's in all of the activity that's occurring in aviation right now. The noise of in-flight disturbances, the noise of checkpoint disturbances. And I say that just to point out that, hey, this is really unusual. It's at a level that I've not seen since I've been in this position. And I get concerned that someone would look at that and try to hide within that noise, and to say, hey, somebody getting up and approaching the flight deck of an aircraft, while it would have been incredibly unusual 2 years ago, is not as unusual as it was back then, and they might view more of an opportunity there. So I worry about that noise creating an opportunity that some people might think they can take. To meet all of this development and threat, we have changed the standard operating procedures that both our federal air marshals use and our screening workforce uses and our inspectors use to be able to respond to the threat as it changes. We've made some security plan amendments. We've issued security directives and emergency amendments as we've needed to. And we are also going to issue some information circulars, some more information circulars that basically lay out some practices that we think are particularly important for our private sector partners to consider. So what you can expect coming up next is more cyber concern and more cyber regulation through security plans. As you saw, when the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack occurred, and this kind of goes back to the authorities that TSA has an agency, we very quickly placed some requirements on the most critical pipeline companies in the pipeline sector. Initially in about 20 days, and then a couple months later, some additional requirements. You can expect that we will make some security plan amendments and issue some security directives for everyone in the transportation sector with respect to cybersecurity. This is really, really important, and it's really important that key leaders and organizations understand this particular threat very, very carefully. The other thing is you will see us continue to invest in technology. I firmly believe, and I think all of you do as well, is that when you ask somebody to perform a function that's very critical, that's performed well, it's really important that you give them the right tools to perform that function. And so we've invested heavily in new X-ray technology in our screening checkpoints using computed tomography, which is a significant improvement over what we have had in the past. We've invested heavily in being able to verify the identity of passengers and have real-time information with respect to the passenger's screening status. And we're also investing in new advanced imaging technology, which is our on-person screening process. And the whole idea behind this technology is to, again, put the right tools in the hands of our officers to greatly increase security effectiveness, because every single one of the things that I just mentioned does that. And the other part is all of them improve the passenger experience as they're going through our screening process. They improve it in a couple of ways. There's less contact between a passenger and one of our officers. Just using the identity verification, for example, now a passenger takes their driver's license and inserts it in a slot in a machine rather than handing it off to somebody else. There's less of a need for passengers to divest things out of their carry-on bags because the X-ray technology can see more because its technology is that much better. And then with the on-person screening, we will, in the not too distant future, have the ability to reduce the number of pat-downs we conduct because the technology is just better at detecting and has a lower false alarm rate. So these technology investments are critically important. There is a program that we have, and this is one of the ways that TSA is able to remain agile in terms of bringing technology on. We have a program called a capability acceptance program. And what that stands for is that private sector entities, airports and air carriers, if they want to purchase some of the technology that I've just described that's already been certified and qualified by us and put it in checkpoints that service their customers, we have a program that enables that to happen. And what that's allowed us to do is to very quickly put technology in our screening process and also reduce the overall government investment, which means that the dollars that I have on the federal side for capital investment go a little bit further. The next topic to just touch on briefly is partnerships. And I think we have really good partnerships with our other federal agency partners, in particular the Federal Aviation Administration. Steve Dixon and I are in constant communication with each other. And I think that across the agencies, there is just a very, very good working relationship. We have great relationships with the associations. Faye mentioned it. We have monthly calls with all of the associations for both airports and air carriers and surface transportation systems. Great independent relationships with carriers and airports. And then we also have our Aviation Security Advisory Committee, which Naboyo is a member. The Aviation Security Advisory Committee provides advice to me on things that we are contemplating with respect to aviation security. I attend all of those meetings, and the ASAC, the acronym, has provided some really good advice and really helped us, really enabled us to have very good communications with all of our industry stakeholders. We also have really good cooperation with our international partners. And one of the things that's up on the Hill, I think today or tomorrow, is going to be a bill to permit one-stop security in certain international locations coming to the United States. What that means is that, if you're screened in one of our partner countries, and we'll do a pilot on this, that you don't need to get rescreened for follow-on domestic travel in the US. And the bill just allows us to prototype this concept and prove that it works and that it actually increases security overall. The flights coming to the United States that are from one-stop locations will be more secure than flights today. With respect to the last element that I mentioned, our people, 60,000 person organization. We, in my view, have had a very successful summer of 2021. We've all been challenged with being able to hire workers to work in airports and to work in TSA screening operations. We've been very successful at that. I watch wait time data every single day. I get a report every morning that rolls up wait times every hour for every airport in the country. And we have standards of passenger throughput, and rarely do I see those standards not being complied with. And generally when they do, there's either a major construction project at the airport, or in some airports, we've had all lanes open, all lanes fully manned. At that point, there's not much more that we can do other than continue to advocate for an increase in the number of screening lanes that we have at those airports. So I'm really proud of the men and women that are part of TSA. I think they've done a great job. Our front line has served throughout a 35-day government shutdown. I mentioned that because that is a distant memory, but it's coming up this week again, and they have also served throughout the pandemic. And important, and every TSA person, and all of you know this, that you see in a screening checkpoint, behind them are a lot of people supporting them and doing the very important job that they have to do. Just a couple of, very quickly, some topic areas that I thought I'd give you some data on. And this is data that, I'll give you kind of the time frame for the data. And the first one would be on unruly passenger behavior. Now, I look at this in two dimensions. I look at it from a checkpoint status, because we have had unruly passenger behavior on our checkpoints, and also in flight. And I base that in-flight data on reports that we get from carriers. And we coordinate all of the unruly behavior actions on the part of the US government very closely with the FAA. When I look at unruly behavior, I think all of it's bad, but I'm particularly focused on unruly behavior that usually results in an assault of some sort or more. And just to give you a sense for how often that has been occurring, from the 4th of July weekend to this past Sunday, we've had 83 level 2s or higher declared by pilots in US airspace. Of those 83, there were 35 diverts to a different airport as a result. So 42% resulted in a diversion to an airport. This does not count the flights, the aircraft that have returned to the gate based on a passenger that might become unruly before the aircraft gets in flight. At our checkpoints, we've had 110 instances where there's been an assault or higher in our checkpoints. And that's resulted in 36 arrests, or 33% arrested by local law enforcement that's present in our checkpoints. Rest assured that every instance of unruly behavior is always followed up by either the FAA or TSA with a civil penalty action. We do an investigation. If we find that a civil penalty is warranted, we proceed with civil penalty action. We are taking a very strong stance on this. We have from the very beginning. The unruly behavior on the part of passengers is at a level that I have not seen since I've been in this position. It's very concerning to me. With respect to weapons identification at checkpoints, since the beginning of the calendar year, we've identified 4,500 live weapons. These are weapons that have a magazine in the weapon and sometimes a round chambered. So 4,500 weapons, live weapons, that have been prevented in our screening process from getting into the secure area or getting on board aircraft. And then other weapons, so not live, but other weapons, 3,400 since the beginning of the calendar year. So these are big numbers, and the rate per million passengers is much higher now than what it was 2 years ago. Basically, what I do is I baseline off of 2019 and earlier, because 2020 was such an anomalous year. Prohibited items. So prohibited items are things like knives and throwing stars, all kinds of items that we list on our website that we do not allow passengers to bring through the checkpoint. We've seized over 3,200 prohibited items since the beginning of the calendar year. With respect to mask enforcement, since the beginning of February, we've had a mask requirement put in place in the entire transportation sector using TSA's authorities based on a CDC order. We've had 3,600 mask violations, and the penalty was just recently doubled. So the initial first offense penalty is up to $1,000, and the repeat penalty is up to $3,000. COVID-19 impact on the TSA workforce. Over 10,000 of the men and women in TSA have tested positive for COVID-19. We have tragically lost 29 of our employees as a result of this disease. And 86% of the COVID infections in TSA, no surprise, are within our screening workforce, given the work that they do and the contact that they have with other people. Final topic area, just to give you some data, unmanned aerial systems. We have 30 plus instances where aircraft have had to take evasive action based on the sighting of a UAS. And on any given day, there are from usually between 3 and a dozen UAS sightings in U.S. airspace on approaches to airports generally at all altitudes. We are working very hard on this, trying to put in place a detection, track, and identify capability at the core 30 airports, and then continuing to build beyond that. So with that, let me conclude my comments and then give all of you a chance to make comments to me. And like I said, I'd be happy to answer any question that you pose. So the floor is yours. Mm-hmm.
Microphone, please.
So yesterday we talked about how the entire U.S. aviation network could look very different, and with incorporation of unmanned and the eVTOLs and everything else. And I was just wondering, how is TSA planning to keep pace with that? What kind of resources do you need from the Congress for it?
Yeah, great question, Faye. And one of the best ways to keep pace with it, and one of the things we're working with the Congress on, is to see if we can't get part of the aviation passenger security fee earmarked for investment in capability at our screening checkpoints. As you may know, there's already an earmark, $250 million a year for explosive detection systems in checked baggage. And that program has proven to be very successful because we know we can plan out every year, having a steady stream of funds available for investment. And importantly, the vendors who are so important to this process also know that there's going to be investment being made there. When I mentioned the capability acceptance program, one of the things that's allowed us to do is to prototype some unique ways of conducting screening that we look into the future and think are very viable and very possible. That program allows us to use our partnership with industry to use your procurement process and your dollars to bring technology into our checkpoint once we know that it will detect what we need to detect. And that allows us to just see how things work and helps us form what our longer term acquisition programs are. But you're going to see in screening checkpoints around the country, literally every piece of technology in those checkpoints is going to be different You're already seeing it. We're already starting to roll out a lot of this. It'll probably take us 5 to 7 years to finish it up, but it's going to be completely different than what it is today. And one of the things I don't want to do is I don't want to see this effort result in everybody stepping back saying, okay, we did that. We don't need to look at new technologies, new ways of screening passengers and increasing the overall security effectiveness. I think that just that continuous investment and that continuous update is really important. And I think we're also beyond the stage where we need to have everything the same everywhere. What needs to be the same is the interface that our officers use for training purposes, but we can accept some equipment variability as long as the screening effectiveness is at least at what we require in our system. And that requirement goes up every single year.
So Faye asked a 10-year question. I'll bring it in a little closer. The holidays coming up.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that you're having success holding on to and attaining labor. In particular, the peak holiday season gonna likely be a very packed one. And the follow-on question to that is, do you have clarity on effective date of the executive order for vaccination in your view and your contingency plan for that as it relates to frontline labor?
Sure. The effective date, I think the last one first, Dan. The effective date for the executive order is for federal employees to be fully vaccinated, which means have had the last shot and 2 weeks prior, so that the vaccine has had a chance to work by the 22nd of November. So that's really right before the Thanksgiving holiday travel period. And we've messaged that to our workforce. We've got about, of the people that have responded already, the deadline is for a response to tell us whether or not our employees are vaccinated is going to be on Thursday, but we've had about 70% response already. So we have a pretty good idea of where we're at, and we're in actually pretty good shape so far, but there's still a lot of people that need to take action with respect to a vaccine, and we've been very clear about that. With respect to how they travel, the workforce we have today is the workforce that's going to do screening really realistically for Thanksgiving and for the Christmas holidays. There's almost no opportunity to bring on people and have them certified in our security functions between now and certainly Thanksgiving. Where we're focused is beginning in April and May of next year, bringing on the number of people we need to bring on to handle what we project as passenger volumes for 2022. Our projection is that we will be at least at FY19 levels in 2022. That's our planning factor. And what we saw over the course of this past summer is there were some days where we were pretty close overall in the entire system to FY19 levels. In fact, this past Sunday, we were only 10% down, which is pretty remarkable given the Delta variant is still suppressing travel. But we're looking at 2019 levels, and in some airports, I mean, we've been 150% over 2019, just based on the destination airport that travelers have chosen to fly to, given that it's mostly a leisure traveler market at this point in time. I expect that we'll be able to meet the number of people we need to bring on board for that FY22 projection. But one of the things that is also an initiative up on Capitol Hill and an initiative within the administration is to change substantially the way we compensate our frontline workforce, and in fact, all employees within TSA. I strongly support that, because when we survey our workforce, and the government's very methodical about surveys, and there's a survey every year for all federal employees. It's called the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. The number one dissatisfier that our employees highlight, particularly our frontline employees, is low pay. And when you compare TSA employees, because we're in a different pay system than the rest of the federal government, there is a disparity there that we need to close. And so we need to be more competitive from a pay front. That will undoubtedly make our recruiting a lot easier, and importantly, reduce our attrition, because this is a two-part equation. And hey, I would much rather retain an employee that's performing well than go through the expense of recruiting and hiring new at the rate we're currently having to do it. So those pay initiatives are critically important for our long-term success.
You had mentioned in your earlier comments cybersecurity threats and wanting to bring more folks in the transportation space into that threat assessment. Is there any color on that you can share, or a timeline on when we might have those conversations?
Sure. With respect to the cybersecurity threat, first, we brought on a good number of people into TSA that focus just on cybersecurity and transportation systems. As you know, we stood up a new agency in the Department of Homeland Security called the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. CISA has the core expertise on cyber, and then each one of the sector risk management agencies, like TSA is for the transportation sector, brings on cyber staff that can focus just on that sector. With respect to a timeline, some of those conversations are already occurring with your staffs on doing things like, for example, when Colonial Pipeline first occurred, one of the things that the United States just didn't have was a baseline for how often does a ransomware attack occur in this country. Is this, how anomalous is what we're seeing really, given what's going on across the country? Because we weren't collecting and requiring that data, one of the first steps we took post-Colonial was to require the pipeline industry to report any significant cyber incident. Not every cyber issue that came up, but we defined what significant was. And then all that reporting goes into one location, it goes into CISA, and then CISA distributes that reporting. Every time there's a significant issue, our command center gets notified that there's a significant cyber issue there. So we required significant issue reporting. We also required the designation of a cyber security coordinator for each company. This is a person that the government could reach out to 7/24. In other words, that person doesn't have to be awake 24 hours a day, but just so we can contact somebody if there is a cyber threat that we might become aware of, or if we have a question on a company's cyber response posture. And the third part was to take a look at some of the cyber standards and do a self-assessment to give us an idea of where you fall within that assessment. And then what we did in the pipeline sector is we issued a second security directive that I can't talk about in an open session like I talked about the earlier one, but it does require certain cybersecurity measures to be put in place. And certainly when you're dealing with an industrial control system technology, we wanted to separate off business systems from operational systems so that a cyber actor couldn't access a company's IT infrastructure through their business system and easily jump to their control systems. So those are the kinds of things that we're most concerned about. And there's been good dialogue already, and we're actually doing very well, in my view, in raising the security in the pipeline sector. I mean, the compliance with the first security directive was 100%, which we expect, and the compliance with the second directive, much more detailed, is going very, very well.
Good morning. I'm Julie Schell. I'm the VP of Safety and Security at Piedmont Airlines. First of all, thank you for your support with the mask mandate. That's certainly been helpful, and appreciate the increased fines. A two-part question. One, in hindsight, being 2020, what would you have done differently with those security directives? And then do you see them still expiring in January?
Sure. On the mask mandate, our mask mandates are predicated on CDC guidance. So once we had a CDC order, then we used TSA authorities to make it a requirement within the transportation sector, because everybody was concerned with the potential for transmissibility in transportation. And additionally, we also wanted to reassure passengers that protective measures were being taken to protect them, and also within our employee base to protect our employees who are interacting with an awful lot of people. We just extended that mask mandate out to the 18th of January, so just right after Martin Luther King Day holiday. And we will, like we did in the past, we rely on CDC advice as to whether that mask mandate needs to be continued. The other thing that I should have mentioned that I will highlight for you is if there is a pre-check or a global entry passenger that does not comply with one of our security directives, we have protocols that might result in the suspension of those privileges for a period of time or permanently, depending on the circumstances of the case. We investigate every situation so we can make the right judgment, but we're trying to put as much incentive as we possibly can to get people to comply. But really, when I look at our operational reports, there are a lot of mask issues that come up, and for us, in some ways, when we see a passenger not wearing a mask that approaches the screening checkpoint, we don't screen them. You're just not going to be screened. And so there's a key incentive to put the mask on. Once they're on board an aircraft, there have been some very difficult situations that the cabin crews have had to deal with people that refuse to wear masks. And I think one position that's critically important in this for people boarding aircraft is the gate agent, making the judgment at the gate before somebody gets on board the aircraft that they need to. If they're not compliant, then they just don't go down and get on board the aircraft. So we've been doing everything we can to support folks that are enforcing those requirements, and to the extent too of if we need to bring law enforcement in, that we do that.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So Airlines for America highlighted last week that Dallas-Fort Worth is being a test site for TSA registration. Do you see this for the holiday season? Do you see this as being something that you might roll out in the near future for peak season process flow control?
For TSA registration for what?
For Dallas-Fort Worth, the upcoming holiday season,
Right.
that you register
Yeah.
for your TSA, going through TSA to
Oh,
get
sure.
here.
I know what you're talking about. Okay. Yes. One of the things that we had done, and we tested this in Denver, was allowing passengers to identify a time when they would present themselves for screening. I think it was within a 15 or a 30-minute window. And that way we could ensure that we more level loaded our screening process. And once we can do that, then we can say to a passenger, hey, you're going to get through, let's say you reserved a spot between 10 and 10:30. We can guarantee that between that period of time, you're going to get through screening expeditiously. And it's a pilot. We're trying it out because one of the things that we deal with, and your gate agents deal with, everybody in the aviation system deals with are the bank periods. And if you spread out passenger volume across the entire time an airport is open, very manageable. Adequate capacity exists in almost every airport. But when a lot of flights take off at 6 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock in the morning, it creates a lot of people presenting themselves for screening in a very short period of time. And so the idea here is, hey, let's dedicate a lane or sometimes 2 lanes to just scheduled screening and just see how that works. And we had pretty good experience with it at Denver. We'll try it at the FW and see if that experience replicates itself. But the key part here is that one of the things that I mentioned it when I talked about technology, I am focused on the passenger experience. I am most focused on security effectiveness, but I think that the passenger experience is very important for us overall. A compliant passenger equals better security in my view, and allows us to focus on passengers that we don't know much about or might have some concerns over. Thank you. No, thank you all. I really appreciate Faye and RAA and all your membership. I really appreciate the partnership we have. I think it's critical for everybody. My success, all of your success going forward. And like I said, our goals are aligned. We want safe and secure travel. We all do want that, and I appreciate your support. Thank you.